Welcome back to Fight for Your Health. Genetics. Genetics could spend obviously weeks studying it, but epigenetics takes on a whole new thinking to help you. It's fun for you to know that homeopathy recently received a nice nod from Luc Montagnier, the co-discoverer of AIDS. And it's interesting to know that he talks about the research that there's an electromagnetic signal coming out of the ends of the DNA. And he said, I can't say homeopathy is right and everything, but what I can say is that high dilutions are right. High dilutions are something, they are not nothing. So this is just the beginning of the story. When you get into this quantum mechanics, the physics of the microscopic world, I have purchased this course and I've enjoyed it tremendously. It comes with a whole series of DVDs so that you can become knowledgeable about what none of us learned. Just like none of us got a degree in molecular biology, if you don't have a background in quantum, you can't understand the world, because there was always the two worlds, the microscopic world and the big world, and they just didn't know how to put the physics together to bring it all together. And it's coming together now. And when you start to understand the principle of uncertainty and some of the other important things in quantum mechanics, you'll be able to do much more understanding how I can sit here and tell you that I don't care how bad the genes were. The genes are useful in one sense for me. I always have to be honest. I need the patient on a tight rein, because every patient wants to pretend that every day is Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter combined in one, and that all the dessert tray is for him, and that he doesn't have to exercise. And across the board, I need something to motivate patients or keep them on a tight rein. So whatever that is, it's very clear to me that if you do your testing and you find out that you have ApoE4 and that you have much higher chance of having Alzheimer's, maybe reason will prevail and you'll keep the alcohol and the cigarettes and out and the exercise in. But that is the usefulness. Other than that, it is not predictive as they are making people think, because there isn't any gene that needs to express. They are not expressed until you set the lifestyle that allows them to express. So for as little as $1,000, soon people will be doing lots and lots of these testings. And the unseen risk of these genetic diseases, when people learn they're carriers, doctors focus on the risk of having a child, but the research are finding that just being a carrier can lead to the health problems too. That was true. I could tell you that when I looked at all of the patients' autistic parents, the autistic parents have lots and lots of health problems that clearly was in the parents that was predictive of what would happen to the children. And so it's interesting to realize then that Gaucher's disease don't have an enzyme that will cause it, but they do have a risk of getting Parkinson. So these are some diseases that will cross the board. Cystic fibrosis and increased risk of some sinus or various forms of asthma. So a detailed genetic portrait of the deadliest human cancers. The studies have shown the most detailed things. And if we look at these cancer gene sequencing at the Sanger Institute in the UK, they're based on the premise that information will help people understand these tumors. Now, when you do get a piece of a patient's tumor, you have much more information, and that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the Johnson & Johnson test. It has a device that catches 1 out of 1 billion cells that are going through my bloodstream that actually have cancer. So when I catch those cells, I can then test those cells to learn more about my tumor. And I definitely will have a much better handle on which treatment will work. Now, the work that we're doing on the vitamin C on cancer, there's no doubt that when we find the right chemo and give it in low dose, somewhat like we're doing with insulin potentiated therapy, we definitely get a much bigger bang for the buck. But that's going into information. And there's so many things that we need to go through these slides that I want to keep going through, because you'll have a chance to read these slides in some depth when you review these things. But the studies show gene alterations in pancreatic and brain cancers. And this is the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. They do beautiful work. Howard Hughes really left a major research center, and they have some really good things they're doing. This is what's going on in epigenetics. Now, the word epi means above. And this is the only reason I can make you all understand that there's a component of epigenetic disease in every one of you listening to me right now. Why do I say that? Because journal at Duke showed that phthalates and bisphenol A are causing a change in epigenetics and how you methylate. So we'll get into that a little bit more here. This is Dr. Journal. Tale of two mice. Once given birth to identical twin sisters. One is brown fur and will grow up to be lean and healthy. The other is yellow fur and destined to be obese. What was it that happened? How did we make this change? Well, you can see the brown and you can see the fat yellow. This is how sad this is. This is America today, fat and yellow and obese and diabetic. And what they said is they proved that a single exposure of the bisphenol A by warming the food we would give to the animal in the same container that we used to warm baby food in microwaves in this country was enough to give enough bisphenol A to change permanently. All offspring of this animal for generations to be would be obese and yellow and diabetic. So that's kind of interesting, but you can turn it back too. Now, what you're learning here then, that the health of the mothers will influence the health of the offspring. So obviously we've now told you that there should be nobody that's pregnant that's not on a detoxification program. Because you can't spell zeolite, you may want to go to my website, Zeolite Answer, Z-E-O-L-I-T-E, and learn how we use it around the rest of the world. Because a lot of people aren't going to use oral chelation because they're going to learn things that make them afraid to. But across the thing, we need to make it very clear that there's impaired insulin secretion, impaired glucose tolerance, etc., as a result of the high-fat diet that was fed to the male rats that then set the stage for adiposity. So there's a tremendous amount of information here. And what we want to understand is the difference in the methylation, because methylation is like acetylation, sulfation, oxygenation. It's just where we add a CH3 group. And when we add a CH3 group in your body, what happens is that we're starting to handle the detoxification. So toxic and heavy metals early in life promote disease later in life through epigenetics. Now, minerals are necessary for cellular, metabolic, and neurological function. I spent my lifetime with the laboratory mineral lab. I lectured around the world, and I could convince you without a shadow of a doubt that every disease has an excess or deficiency of some trace mineral as a part of that disease. Now, whether you talk iron, copper, manganese, zinc, etc., heavy metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, these are the neurotoxins, and these all contribute to impaired development. Now, interestingly enough, we've run across something called Quinton marine plasma. This is a crazy story, working through a René Quinton who lived 100 years ago in Paris, France, and treated children who were near dead with ocean water that he got only at 70-foot depth, only at the edge of natural vortexes that are seen in the ocean. We won't go further into that, but it's an exciting way for you to know that there's additional therapies out there that you can learn about in life. And we have 10,000 people every day receiving some Quinton marine plasma as an injection for serious chronic illnesses, including tuberculosis, syphilis, etc. Interesting things. But epigenetics, but that was just giving you trace minerals from the ocean. But an unusual trace mineral, because it was so unusual you could take the blood out of a dog and keep them alive with this Quinton. So it's a very unusual way that they get that from the ocean. But epigenetics plays a role in the nutritional status of every individual because we have low folate. Now, folate that could be the subject of the next hour talk. Because the folic acid that everybody's getting is not the natural one. It's the one that's cheap. The natural one, Merck of Germany got the patents from the University of Arkansas, I believe, and the bottom line is 5'-methyl tetrahydric folate, known as metafolin, is patented. It costs you $15,000 a kilogram, so you don't buy it, unless you understand all this. You can get folinic acid for about $7,000 a kilogram. I use that in a sublingual form called Beyond B12, but I use it because I understand how vital it is. Because the research is that the synthetic folic acid won't work if you've disturbed some of your genes that handle folate metabolism, and one hint is elevated levels of homocysteine. But that's just a tip of the iceberg, because some homocysteine only goes into better management with trimethylglycine or B6. And there's a lot to know here, but I just want to wake you up to the fact that there's a lot, awful lot here that you can learn about Alzheimer's through epigenetic disease and beginning to put all these things together, but always hear the word I'm worried about decreased methylation as a cause of aging and higher levels of some of the secretases as well as disturbance in homocysteine metabolism. So now they would like to image people to see who's going to get Alzheimer's, because early warning would be good. Because if you had early warning, you might stop smoking, you might exercise, you might do some of the FIGHT program. So I'm in favor of early warning as long as it doesn't take you down the phony pathway. The approval would be for a dye that will hone in on the plaque in the brain, making it visible on a PET scan. So if a person has Alzheimer's, there's no as yet treatment that can slow. Well, that's not true when you watch the rest of this presentation. Now, the myth of Alzheimer's is the name of a book by an MD, PhD, former NIH researcher who helped write the grants for Alzheimer's, and he says, we dreamed up the word Alzheimer's to get money from Congress. So you need to learn a lot more. So anything you think you know in any field is always subject to a lot more information. I want to interrupt to tell you that I was dealing with a company president in the Midwest who was supposed to go blind with a rare form of pigmentary glaucoma. And so I told him I'd never heard of pigmentary glaucoma, but I said I have only one program. It's to stop you doing everything that's bad for you and emphasize doing everything that's good with you. Well, as a result of that, it's been 12 years and he still flies his jet plane. When he called me, he was supposed to be blind in a year. Now, not being an expert in disease, I had to just take the best I knew, was how to find out anything that's bad for you, smoking, dog food, and anything that's good for you, might be wheatgrass, whatever you believe is good for you. So he wound up with over 200 chelation. He bought his, we got him his own nurse, so he had a full-time clinic of mine in his town that would treat him and his whole family. But out of all that, we had an interesting phone call. His vice president's brother was insured by him, suddenly had their child at age about 18 months suddenly turned blue. And they rush him to the Children's Hospital of St. Louis, and they're told that this is an acute emergency and they're going to have to do a heart transplant on the child. And so, since I was trained in radiology, I look at every doctor as being suspect that he doesn't know enough. And I certainly didn't trust Children's Hospital. So I talked to the parent and I said, has there ever been an x-ray taken of this child before? Yes, 4 months before the child had a bad cough, something they'd taken an x-ray. Being in radiology, if I can get the old x-ray and put it next to the new one, I might know something that no one else knows. So I had them rush, get the actual picture, but I'm on the long distance phone and I'm not in St. Louis, but I have it put up on the screen by the chief of radiology as a friend called, and I said, I just need a wet reading. Would you tell me, is there any difference? He said, Dr. Gordon, the heart was massively enlarged 4 months ago. We see the lazy doctors of children who wanted to do a heart transplant didn't bother to find that out. So if it was enlarged 4 months ago, it's not an acute infection, is it? It's genetic. And so I asked these nice doctors, did you ever measure carnitine? Because carnitine deficiency alone will explain a very enlarged heart. No, they hadn't measured carnitine. They measured coenzyme Q? No. Measured magnesium? No, they did nothing. So like I often do, we had a private healing ceremony, and we smuggled into the intensive care ward of that hospital, and we asked the nurses and everybody to stay out of the room because we're going to have a healing ceremony that you're allowed to have. And so miraculously, all the things that I needed, including garlic and magnesium and coenzyme Q and carnitine, were miraculously put in drop form and given under the tongue. And the pulse went from 180 down to 120 within 4 hours, and the blue color left the child. The child didn't have to be laying on its face anymore. And then eventually I transferred the child out of that hospital because they didn't like me. They actually wondered how I had the nerve, only being licensed by Arizona, to interfere with their treatment in Missouri. They never asked what we did. And I transferred the child to somebody else so I could watch the heart get smaller, which it did. And we later had confirmation that I was right. It was a genetic problem. The child needed much higher than normal level of more than one nutrient, not just carnitine. But as you get into all this field, you begin to understand that medicine today is still kind of shoot from the hip like the Old West. And a lot of doctors give you their opinion, but it may not be too valid if you get another doctor's opinion. And so the problem is, how does the poor patient figure all this out? Now that you know that Alzheimer's is not a true diagnosis, and you'll understand that everything I'm teaching you here, everything, is the way I have no Alzheimer's. I bring people's brains back. I can tell you that there's products as simple as cognizin, citicoline, that have been studied at Harvard with functional MRI that absolutely make everybody's brain work better. That phosphatidylserine is a main part of what I call my beyond chelation, because I understand neurotransmitters and the importance of protecting the brain and the importance of choline and acetylcholine and neurotransmitters. This is not complicated. It's all able to be done, but these are diseases that we don't need to have. So there's the nutritional impact on the memory function and DNA methylation, and I'm really emphasizing today that when I give anybody vitamin C, I have it with trimethylglycine, methylsulfonomethane, because I support the methylation. But now we have more and more people who are going to need extra choline, and the real methylated B12, given sublingual, you don't absorb B12 when you take it by mouth. You get 1 to 2% absorption, so you put it into sublingual. So as you begin to put all these things together and then watch the homocysteine levels come down, accidental methionine is useful across the board. So if we look at epigenetic and cardiovascular disease, there's multifactorial. Remember, everything I stress from the day I started talking is multifactorial. And what we're trying to do is get you to understand that it's managing this CV disease, which I have been fortunate. I have nobody dying of an MI in about 20 years, and I have the audacity to stand up and tell them that I don't care what the White Tower tells you, that you're a heart attack waiting to happen, fire them. Only a PET scan tells you who's really ischemic in the heart, and the angiogram is nonsense. But epigenetic changes, you can't avoid it. All of you have got phthalates and bisphenol A in you and lead and mercury. All of you have polybrominated diphenyl ether. All of you have bromine in your bread 8 times what it used to be. All of you are getting fluorine. Even if you're not in fluoridated water, they are treating our food. And if you eat any processed food, you are loaded with fluorine, which induces an iodine deficiency, which makes your thyroid not work. I hope you can understand all of it ties together. So folate, as a cause and treatment for schizophrenia, I told you that I was trained by the only doctor, Abraham Hoffer, MD, PhD, who just died at age 94, who really did research and trained me to see all these mental diseases as an orthomolecular physician. I loved psychiatry. I thought I'd become a psychiatrist. I studied at UC Langley Porter, San Francisco. But if the patient's in a total brain fog, you don't make a lot of headway helping them solve their life issues. This is nothing too complicated. Get the toxins out, put the good stuff in. Jeff Bland has done a great job of helping bring IFM, Institute for Functional Medicine, into mainstream and putting together powerful lectures. That his video, which you can watch right there, will let you understand how these cells are like sentient beings. They think. The world is much more complicated. Lynn McTaggart wrote it, called it The Field. How does your dog know when you're coming home? You call on the phone and say, Dad, no, the dog starts barking 5 minutes before you surround the corner. They know it's the field. There's so much going on that we have no ability to handle. But Bruce Ames, as well as Les Backer, teach in Scientific American about mitochondrial diseases. The secret life of the mitochondria. However you want to know. You know, mitochondria, we now know, were once free-living bacteria. But you have 1,000 of them inside of a healthy heart cell if you ride your bike and do exercise. You don't have a lot of them if you don't exercise. But these are the power pack. But he's trying to teach you that if you use things like carnitine and the right kind of stabilized all-R-lipoic acid, which most people aren't getting, of course. It's always the devil is in the details. But he's trying to teach you that we can have your mitochondria go on, and he can see the old rats start to dance. Old rats, and now we actually have proof of an old mice that was actually near death becoming young again when you watch the rest of the presentation. So there's an internal longevity switch, and supplements can help turn that on, and none of us have had enough of our testing done to know which one of us needs 100 times more of a given nutrient. So in orthomolecular, I err on the side of giving more nutrients because I know the safety and the benefit-risk ratio. So the anti-aging triad by Stephen Holt is about calorie restriction and compounds that we can find like resveratrol, which the new resveratrol called terastilbene, which has been developed by USDA. You heard that, USDA? This is the real stuff. When you see this whole story, you will never go another day without understanding it. We can reverse. This means I don't wish to go without food. It's part of my enjoyment of life. Therefore, I'm not going to become a thin little skeleton. but I can enjoy the potential that these give me that same sirtuin, S-I-R-T, that stands for Silent Information Regulator. It's part of molecular medicine, but we have to support the telomeres, and now I can get telomeres to grow with things like exercise. But for people who won't exercise or they're too late, and you've got them too late, I now will teach my energy module. I will teach how to use Tesla-based, high voltage, low amperage, electric muscle stimulation that I can take a paralyzed leg and add 10 inches of actual muscle to that leg and make that person who has a foot ready to be cut off not have to have the foot cut off. So we can do things even if you don't feel like getting on a bike and riding because I caught you too late in life. And with the pulse magnetic field, I get all of these things. And then stem cells, if you understand that the experts in depression today will tell you that antidepressants never usually really do much for the first 6 to 8 weeks, and then at the end of 6 to 8 weeks, the reason they think that antidepressants are working is because they're turning on stem cells and helping rewire your brain. So it's a whole new world, because I was told when I was a kid that I had one drink that I lost at least 30 brain cells forever. And now it turns out we're making brain cells every day, and I can make more. And pulsed electromagnetic field, as well as the right kind of exercise and the right nutrition that we'll get into, can change many, many things. Calorie restriction, of course we should all stop when we're full. That's not hard. These are some of the benefits. These are the outcomes of calorie. You'll have a colder body. Well, I don't like having my body temperature low because my chemistry in my body works best at 98.6, so I'm very fussy about giving a lot of people thyroid that no one else will give thyroid, but you have to know enough, because if you don't know enough, doctors will criticize you saying, they didn't fail the thyroid test, how did you dare give that patient thyroid supplements? Because I know my business, that's how. And so you need to understand that it's a symphony that we play. And so you need to understand the syndrome X, and that you can help things with niacin. I mean, niacin is part of the first things in orthomolecular medicine. That's how we stopped the voices of the schizophrenics 45 years ago. When I first got into this with Dr. Abraham Hoffer with the double-blind controlled studies, that this actually received approval by our government. You shouldn't be using statins. The government's position paper 20 years ago was you should give niacin first. But it was so much more convenient to give a drug. Who cares about the side effects? Who cares? So across the board, the protocol for nutrition and longevity is important, and telomeres are very exciting, and we now have laboratories that are reproducibly for $350 measuring telomeres. It isn't as exactly as science as we want it yet, because even having a couple cells whose telomeres are extremely short may mean that even though you look pretty good, that you're not as good as you should be, but this is moving us in the direction. And since I have been teaching anti-aging for a long time, I have a website I can give you now. If you write it down, it is imhealth.com. We've spent $1 million on developing all the tests so I could make you a scientist at anti-aging. What is anti-aging? You have to be able to look at anti-aging. You lose it as you can't read here and you can't read there. It's how near and how far. How many candles you can burn out. How long it takes the electricity to the top of my heart to the bottom. The QR. There's science to anti-aging. I've been teaching it for a long time. And so you can understand that telomere lengthening is a piece of a puzzle. And we can get benefits from Chinese ginger, ginkgo biloba, N-acetyl. No one should live without N-acetylcysteine today. We all need B12. But because of the methylation problem due to bisphenol A, the FDA tried to say was okay. Now they've been nailed, and everybody knows bisphenol A is not okay. But across the board, nicotinamide, these are things that we know can help. And peer-reviewed literature will show that everyone needs omega-3. I wrote the book, The Omega-3 Miracle. Even extracts of astragalus can induce telomeres activity. So there's a lot more exciting things happening. So how to turn on and have the fountain of youth. It should become obvious that if you activate telomerase, you're going to protect your telomere from getting short. And when the telomere is short, it's the end of the DNA. It's kind of like the end of the shoelace has that nice little arc. If that end of that DNA unravels, you're starting to lose how many more times your cells will permit you to give a new cell and produce some. So when I make a big deal out of methylation, understand methylation is detoxification, but it's also the reproduction of the exact same cell that you lost. A movie was done called Multiplicity, and they wound up making a clone of a clone. And by the time they had the second clone, they had an idiot. because it was like if you make a copy of a copy of a copy, but if you are methylating efficiently, every cell in me that was reproduced from the one that died yesterday, and I lost a couple 100 million yesterday cells, I want every one of them to be identical. So I take all this stuff, but I know what I'm doing and why. And among all these things, we have the 17-beta estradiol. Estrogen comes out to be a piece of anti-aging, and it's so sad that all the women have been lied to. They've been told estrogen is the bad guy. You're going to die of heart disease and cancer, and nobody's looking at the data. It's all nonsense. It was the synthetic form of progesterone that wrecked the woman's study. The entire Women's Health Initiative was entirely due to synthetic. It's whenever these stupid drug companies make something that doesn't belong in our body. So I am fortunate enough, having studied in northern Thailand, to find the lowest incidence of breast cancer in the world, and we have been able to identify the Puraria mirifica and have been able to standardize it. It's available as cholesterol, and it's available worldwide, and we can apply it topically to the vagina itself to restore normal health to the vaginal mucosa. But across the board, I can stop the insomnia, the depression, the bone loss, and the Alzheimer's, and stop all of the change-related, because estrogen is a key part of the growth factors that allows you to have optimal health. And I, as a man, take this natural estrogen-like product because men have to have estrogen just like women have to have testosterone. So the tamoxifen that they used on the Harvard study when the animals were near dead is very interesting because they didn't have to use a synthetic drug that is used in people who think they have breast cancer or been told they have breast cancer. It's able to be done in a different way. Now the stem cell types, stem cell therapy is what we agree. When you see the depression responding, it's because your brain was making new cells. Now they have actually approved a device to treat the depression that no one else has been able to treat, and it's being used at UCLA and Stanford, and it is a pulsed electromagnetic field applied directly to the brain, and it's clearly working through this mechanism. So I prefer to turn on my own stem cells rather than trust somebody that will take $25,000 from me and tells me they have the greatest stem cells since sliced bread. It's going to happen someday that we will be able to get our own cells given back to us, and that's the direction things will take, and it's starting to move that way. And giving you a boost when you're really in bad trouble is not a bad idea, but we would like to have you understand that there's many other roads. This lady, it's a Professor Jasper Ryan, she works at the Ames Research Laboratory in Berkeley, California. And she has shown that all these mice that we were so pointing out, the methylation defect, you can turn off the methylation defect when you give aggressive methylation support, which means you're going to have to learn what metafolin is, 5'-methyltetrahydrofolate, because that is the natural form that is patented by Merck, and they get all the money for it. But that's the one that I put along with methyl B12, and I take it sublingually, because if you begin to see that you can restore and stop that, and the offspring then don't have to be diabetic and yellow and obese. So good news on our DNA, you can fix it with vitamins and minerals, and that's what we're showing you about. And you do that when you understand with the ability to get methylation support. So whenever I take vitamin C in a methylation support product, so that it has trimethylglycine and methylsulfonomethane included with the vitamin C, and that allowed vitamin C by mouth to do what it had never done before, along with adding ribose. And ribose turns out to be an amazing 5-carbon sugar that, studied at Harvard Medical School, can take an ischemic myocardium and bring it back to life. It's almost like if you're on a sailboat and you don't have an auxiliary motor and the wind goes down, really nice to have an auxiliary motor. Ribose is an auxiliary fuel for a part of your heart that you have blown out from excessive exercise, and allows athletes to recover much more rapidly. But it gets stuff into the cells, so there's a reason to learn about ribose. Now, then genomes can lead to personalized vitamin supplement. This is the area that things are going to go in the future. We will one day know, as I said earlier, do we do better on a Pritikin, all-vegetarian, low-fat diet? Or do we do better on Bob Atkins' diet? And that is one that obviously we're going to have all the fights go on, but with fights will one day go away when we start to realize that there's a test to let us know who needs what. Related to cancer, aging, depression, endothelial dysfunction, all of those things are suboptimal detoxification with supplementation of essential vitamins. What we're saying in this thing, very simple, is folate. Now remember, I said use the B12, but take it sublingually, because you don't absorb, or by shot, that's fine. It was the injections of B12 that Dr. Wright pointed out was stopping all that asthma in the kids. Folate is best known as the vitamin critical in pregnancy for birth defect, but we have cheated the kids because they're still using the wrong folic acid, which when you read the studies will get confusing because it appears if you stay on the cheap folic acid too long, you'll see the side effects after 5 or 10 years. So it becomes clear that we win half today, but it's so important that high levels of homocysteine during pregnancy are increasing the chance of the child having a brain disorder. And high levels of homocysteine are tied to the fact that you're not giving enough methylation support to the pregnant woman. So vitamin D will help control the MSG gene, and of course we're convinced, if you really read all the studies on vitamin D, that we need to have a lot of vitamin D if we're going to do anything to cut down some of the defects in children. Remember, at the current time in our country, 1 out of 4 children going to a school sees the school nurse because they're on a drug for their diabetes or their autism or their ADD or their ADHD or their asthma or their diabetes. It's so sad to have a country that is so sick. Now minerals, which were my life's background with Mineral Lab, I got into this whole thing as a result of John Miller, who used to be with Wyeth Ayers, and he was the first guy to put a mineral called a one-a-day vitamin mineral in it. They said it couldn't be done. They said the bottle would explode. Anyhow, he was the first guy to put a mineral, and he was my mentor that brought me into this field, and then I got into owning Mineral Lab and having an office across the world that could teach doctors about the importance of knowing zinc and magnesium and measuring it in blood, urine, and hair. But this really ties it all together with the genetics. Now you can feed your genes, and Jack Challam has written a good book about Syndrome X, trying to help people understand that if you take care of your body, you don't care if everybody in your family has BRCA gene. And then people are looking for a quick shortcut to figure it out, and Peter Dam had done as good as you can do with an inexpensive approach. He's trying to go by blood group, whether you're A, B, or O, and this is one way, and he's had some limited success there, but it's never going to go quite as far as he wants it to go. And we'll have a break now, and we'll start then on the heavy metals.